Hi everyone. So I want to start out by saying I'm really impressed with the engagement you all are putting in. Check out my response to the promotion or retention discussion. I was impressed. There were a lot of things that I got to bring up that happened because you had thinking that led you there. So I was impressed by the attention that you wanted to give to the student. You wanted to include the student in that discussion, and that was something that I thought was really connected to what theorists call the ethic of care, and that's making ethical decisions with caring relationships in mind. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, I would encourage you to check out Nell Noddings, and it might be helpful for you as you're thinking about your final paper for this class to have a different set of principles for helping to solve ethical problems in the classroom. I wanted to also say something about the promotional retention discussion. Remember that you need to address every question that I pose about each case study. So most of you did a great job, but I did take off some points for those of you who didn't completely address each question. So make sure that you're doing that, and I can give you those points. I look forward to looking at your responses to eyes in the back of their heads and stolen trust. Uh, so those cases are really thinking about how to manage student behavior. For this week, we're going to start thinking about curriculum and how curriculum affects the ethical decisions teachers make in regards to developing relationships with students. So the first one I want you to look at is bending toward or away from racial justice. And that case study involves a charter school network trying to implement a culturally relevant curriculum. There are some parts of this case where it will be useful to think about some of the work you've done in student discipline. For instance, in thinking about how the principal deals with Nia, you might want to think about some of the issues you thought about in stolen trust. Also, I just want to point out that there are concerns about parents in this case that might seem similar to some of the issues you discussed in eyes in the back of their heads. About how much control should parents have over what happens in the schools? You should also use the commentaries to think about which students this culturally relevant curriculum is for. How does it benefit or not different populations of students? That might be a useful question to get you thinking about this case ethically. So that's for the first case. And then the second case, politics, partisanship, and pedagogy, has you thinking about what might be controversial to discuss in the classroom. So this is a case that's very much related to those in bending toward or away from racial justice, which is also a case for this week. That's why I put them together. It might be useful in your thinking to think about for whom potential issues might be controversial. In the case in the study, who might transgender access to bathrooms be controversial to? If educators have an ethical obligation to ensure mutual respect among students, how could the debate over this issue be approached? And then what are some principles for deciding what to include in a discussion? The commentary is going to be really helpful for you in helping you think through some of those principles. And then the last thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is your final paper for this class, is you probably ought to start thinking about getting started on that project. So this assignment asks you to do 4 things in imagining the ethical responsibilities of a teacher. So I imagine those of you who are looking to become teachers, this might be how you can yourself become an ethical teacher. So the first question is related to the themes for each week. So I ask you to think about the ethical responsibility towards students. So that's, from last week and a little bit of this week. And then the second question, or the first question, has 3 parts. So there's ethical responsibility towards students, ethical responsibility toward the curriculum. So that's, going into this week's readings, and then the end of this week's discussions. And then you might also think about the responsibility toward the community. So this is what the last week's discussion is happening. If you so that's the first question. Then I want you to think about your own knowledge about schools and the case studies presented here to think about potential ethical issues that might develop for a teacher or you as a future teacher. If you plan on becoming a teacher, then think about the potential ethical issues you are preparing yourself for. The third question asks you to think about strategies for solving ethical issues generally. So think about the commentaries presented here. Think about back to the Jinx piece on distributed justice, or educational goods from Brighouse et al. Are there principles in those pieces or in the commentaries that would be helpful more generally for thinking about your work as a teacher? And then last, I want you to think about a case you're most worried about in being a teacher, an ethical dilemma you're most worried about in being a teacher. So I encourage you to think about something you have seen in the news or from your own schooling experience. So something that sticks out from you that might be similar to some of the cases, but isn't exactly the case, or might be completely different. I encourage that kind of thinking. So I want you, especially if you're doing something completely different, I want you to think about what makes it a dilemma, and then how would you solve it? And I want you to use some of the reasoning and the commentaries or the resources provided to think about how you would solve it. You might also think about, if you're really attached to Nell Noddings, if you're exploring her work, and that you might, pull in some of that. I'm happy to talk with students if you want some assistance in brainstorming for that last question. So if you want some assistance in thinking about a case that you want to kind of cultivate and think about, I can help you with that. And then, as always, in thinking about this final paper, you should address each question to receive full credit for the final assignment. So I look forward to engaging with your discussions from this weekend. And if you have any questions, definitely send me an email. And if you want to talk with me, we can set up a time to talk. So great. I look forward to reading your responses from this week, and I hope you have great success in this week's readings.